When we look at marriage, a husband and a wife living in a house together, I imagine that one of the biggest challenges which face a husband and wife is that how are they going to make a go of it? The love and the romance in the engagement period and leading up to the wedding, I'm sure in most couples is vibrant. The problem is you have to keep it going. You have to keep up the love affair and make sure that the marriage is maintained. You need something which is going to bind the marriage together. What I'd like to discuss today is perhaps what we might label as the elixir of a Jewish marriage. What is the real magical potent which we believe, according to the Torah, holds it together? You need something in the terms of the Gemara. It's called a keli hamachzik brocha, a vessel that holds the blessing. Let me explain what I mean. We'll take an example from the Bible, that when Moses was told to build the tabernacle, the Mishkan, Bezalel, who was the prime architect and designer, interior design of everything that was needed, he changed the order the way actually Moses was told by the Almighty. The Almighty told Moses first of all to build an ark, and then to build a table, which was the shulchan, and to build an altar. But when Bezalel came to do the work, he first built the courtyard, the area outside, claiming that first you need to build the house, and then you put the vessels inside. Perhaps that's the same point in marriage. You need something to put the marriage into. Where do you put your money? In a bank. You don't leave it under a mattress in a bed. It will just get lost. Where do you put your brains? You need a head. If you're making a cholent, then you need a pot. If you take all the skills of a husband and a wife, let's imagine he's very managerial, he's athletic, he's very cheerful, and he's very spiritual also. Take the wife, who's, let's say, very artistic, very well organized, very natural in society. She's also very charming. Now, these are all beautiful gifts which the husband and the wife have, but that doesn't mean to say that it will bind the marriage together. You need something that will hold it together. In Torah terminology, we call it shalom bayis. It means harmony in the home. We can actually turn to the very last comment which is made in all of the Talmud, which says, Lo motza HaKadosh Baruch Hu keli hamachzik brocha. The Almighty never found any vessel which will hold together a bracha more than shalom. Shalom, peace, is the most lasting of all vessels, which retains numerous blessings. In other words, you have his managerial skills and her artistic skills. You have her organization abilities and his athletic. They're all wonderful skills, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will hold together. The meaning of shalom bayis has perhaps two meanings. One is conventional, and one I think is metaphysical, spiritual. What does it mean, harmony in a marriage? What does it mean? Let's look first of all in the conventional terms. I remember I once read about a marriage counselor who had a couple in front of them who was discussing how they can each get along with each other. And the conventional rules of marriage, that you smile at each other, you think of each other, you help each other, you build together. And he then turned around and said to the husband, now listen, as far as you're concerned, you have to know something. You have to give up 60% of the time, and she only has to give up 40% of the time. That's the rule. He then turned around to the wife and said to the wife, now as far as you're concerned, you have to realize something. You always have to give up 60% of the time. 40% of the time he has to give up, but you have to give up more. They looked in query at each other and said, but one second, if he's giving up 60% and she's giving up 60%, said the therapist, yes, of course, don't you realize on that 20% is where the marriage is made. Each are giving up more. Those are conventional rules of harmony in marriage, I suppose. Of course, there's the happiness, there's the devotion between each other, the love, which of course is the understanding conventionally of marital harmony. I remember reading an episode of when Rabbi Moshe Feinstein had died, and the Art Scroll Publishing House brought out very quickly, I think even within the year, a book called Rabbi Moshe, which told the greatness of his judicial decisions as a leader in the nation. And it was brought together, but perhaps it was a little bit quick, and they showed it to his wife, who was still alive, and to Rebbetzin Feinstein, and she read the book, and then they asked her for her comments. And evidently, the Rebbetzin turned around and said, yes, it was very nice, but you really didn't capture my husband. And they said, why? What was wrong? And she said the following line: living with Reb Moshe was Purim every day, and you didn't capture that. He was a bundle of joy. He was a happiness personified. That was the marriage. Beautiful comment to make. Someone once turned around to me and said to me, that's perhaps why Reb Moshe died on Purim. He was, with all his greatness and depth of study and learning and responsibility for the Jewish nation, as the greatest perhaps legal arbitrator in his time, at the same time his personal private life was remarkable in joy and in happiness. That's the way he lived. The conventional rule of marital harmony. You actually find it coming out in the Sheva Brachos, in the 7 blessings, which are said to a husband and wife. The very last blessing, the Gemara in Ksubas explains that we say, Asher Boro Sosain V'Simcha, that the Almighty created joy and happiness. Rashi comments there in the Gemara that the last of the blessings, actually bracha number 6, blessing number 6 and number 7, both we are involved in happiness, in simcha, sosan v'simcha. Rashi comments that the 6th bracha is a prayer. Baruch atah Hashem mesameach chosan v'kala is a blessing that they should have happiness. It's a request. The nature of the blessing is a bakosha, a request. Bracha number 7, mesamech chosan im hakala, that the Almighty makes happy, makes enjoyable the relationship of a husband and a wife. That is a blessing of appreciation, of thanks, says Rashi, that we praise the Almighty that He created the connection of a husband and wife, that it should be one of al yidei dibuk chedva b'simcha, of delight and happiness. What a beautiful phrase. What a magnificent line of the way the marriage must work. Al yidei chedva b'simcha, delight and happiness. And that's what we mean conventionally by shalom bayis. That's what we mean by the marital harmony. We mean the happiness, the love, that the fire still burns between the husband and wife, but it works. The raw material is not necessarily the raw material of just respect. Of course, there has to be respect. It's not just the recognition of giving up each for the other, but the mechanism, the way it works, is it works through chedva v'simcha, through delight and happiness. And that's the way the couple live together year after year. And that's the meaning of Baruch atah Hashem esameach choson v'kala v'choson im hakala. Bracha, blessing number 6, and bracha, blessing number 7, which is said under the chuppah and also for the 7 days of happiness of the first 7 days of marriage. I suppose if we would want to take a blueprint of how a marriage really should work and the terms which are necessary to make it something really worthwhile, you need to look at the passages in the first book of Samuel which talk about the relationship between King David and his great friend Yehonason, Jonathan, who was the son of King Saul. This relationship was a relationship of phenomenal friendship. And I suppose in the end, the most conventional way of describing a husband and wife together is they're the best of friends, how they relate together. And how King David related with Jonathan is the way that a marriage should work. I'll show you some examples. You see all the time the caring that they each had for each other. As you know, King David was a fugitive on the run, running away from Jonathan's father, King Saul, who was tried to kill him. And all the time we see passages where Yehonason, Jonathan, explains how he'll care for him. You have nothing to worry about. At one point he turns around and says to David that you should know that any plan my father has to kill you, I'll hear about it first, and I'm sure to tell you exactly where he's going or what he plans to do. So you have nothing to worry about. That caring was a vital part of their friendship, which I'm suggesting is a very key point inside a marriage as well. I'll share with you an incident that once occurred which brought this point home to me. I remember when one of my children was in a Talmud Torah, in a cheder in Jerusalem, in a school, and they asked all the parents to come for one evening for a dinner that they were making, that they were able to build a new wing. And someone had dedicated a wing in memory of his wife who had died. So I went along, and the man was there, sitting there, and it was a dedication for him. And then he got up to speak. And I think it was one of the most moving speeches I've ever heard. He said that I'd like to explain to you why I called this wing Be'er Miriam. His wife's name was Miriam, and I named the wing Be'er Miriam after my wife Miriam. I'll explain to you why. His name was Seymour Rosenberg. He said that he lived in California, and as a very young man, I think in his 20s, he'd become a millionaire. He had made an enormous amount of money, and around the same time, he got married to his wife. He said, I had it made, I had everything, I'd seen everything, I'd made a fortune. But I think he said within a year or maybe less, my wife became a vegetable. She became exceptionally ill and she could do nothing. To the degree that I became the nurse. I had enough money to have a nurse look after her 24 hours a day, but I decided I would look after my wife. I didn't have to work, and I did everything. The marriage lasted, I think he said, over about 20 years or so, maybe more. And then she died. And he said that I couldn't believe how much I cared for her. Because in reality, she was never really a wife. She never did anything. She couldn't. She was too ill. She was too sick. She was paralyzed, and she couldn't function. And yet, after she died, I was broken. And he explained that I discovered that that's really what ahava is, from the word have, to give. I gave all I could to help her, and that's why I loved her. Beautiful point of what caring is. Love is the giving, is the caring. He later remarried. I think he then moved to the East Coast and lived on Long Island and remarried. But the message was there. What it means to love is really to give. That's behind, I suppose, the conventional rules of marriage. You see also a second point in the relationship between David and Jonathan, that there was no assumptions made. There was no guessing game. Each expressed their love to each other without any barriers. It was clear what Yehonason felt for David and David for Yehonason. They expressed themselves. And that's very important in a marriage, to say out what you feel, to express your love or aggravation, whatever, but to speak it out and talk it out. One incident I remember which came to mind, which made this point so clear to me, as I've been privileged for many years to study in the kollel of the Mir Yeshiva in Jerusalem, in Meir Shorim. And there's a story told of the famous Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, who, when he was younger and he had students who became married, the custom was that a month or two, or maybe 3 or 4 months, I don't know, that the Rosh Yeshiva would turn round to the husband, to the student in the yeshiva, and say, I'd like to come round to your house to visit on a Friday night, if they lived nearby. And the Talmud, of course, knew what was coming. He said, of course, with the greatest of pleasure. And from then on until the Rosh Yeshiva arrived, he prepared something to say to the Rosh Yeshiva. And it was understood that the Rosh Yeshiva was going to come for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, to sit at the table together. And this is the way he did it. He sat at the table, and on one side he put the husband, on the other side the wife. And the Rosh Yeshiva would come in on a Friday night and say to the new husband, maybe you've prepared something to say on the go. And he'd been preparing it day and night for hours, waiting for the opportunity. He was nervous. And he would then say out his Devar Torah. Immediately after he had finished, the Rosh Yeshiva would spontaneously turn around to the wife and say to her, what did you do in your life that you deserved to have a husband who is such a Talmud Chacham, such a scholar? You must have great merit inside you to have such a husband. And he went on like that, and he would give compliments in front of the wife. He then turned around to the wife and said, maybe there's, some cake, as she'd been preparing a recipe for weeks for what to give Rosh Yeshiva's coming, and he had some cake. And then he turned around to the husband and said, please tell me, how on earth did you manage to find such a wonderful wife? You can imagine. He would go on like that, and then he left, and after he left, he brought them together. No guessing games, no assumptions. It was clear. That's what you learn from David and Yehonason. That, I think, is a primary aspect of marriage, of the conventional rules of marriage. A third point, perhaps, which we see in the relationship of the good friends of David and Yehonason, is that we see in reality that Yehonason, the son of Shaul, the king Saul, was really the next in line. He was really the heir to the throne because he was the son of the king. And yet he gave everything up for his friend, David, who became the king instead. And yet, at no point ever do we ever discover that Yehonason was anything, if you can excuse a word, which we say in Yiddish, a nebuchal. He was never a misfortunate person. Quite the opposite we see on the funeral oration, which David said about him, Eich noflu hagiborim. He was a gibor chayil. He was a mighty warrior, but he kept on giving up. Perhaps there's a rule in friendship that when you keep on giving up, you shouldn't consider it a weakness. You're not a lemon. Never ever was Yehonason weak because he gave up the monarchy for his friend David. By no means. He was as mighty as ever. Giving up doesn't imply a weakness. I think those 3 points, the caring, the clear statement of affection and the ability to give up maybe are the conventional rules behind marriage, behind the love and the happiness, as we mentioned, of the rules of happiness, of the flame of love between a husband and wife. But I'd like to take the point further, as we mentioned originally, that Shalom Bayis, marital harmony, has a metaphysical, spiritual side to it. I'd like to explain perhaps what the real depth behind Shalom Bayis is. There is a famous Gemara in Shabbos, in the tractate in the Talmud Shabbos, which discusses which words of the Almighty are you allowed to say in the bathroom. Now we know, of course, the name Yud and Hey or Elokim, one can't say. It's not correct. It's a place of spiritual uncleanliness, and you don't say such words in the bathroom. But could you say the word Melech? Because Hashem is referred to as the king. Could you say Hamokim, the place? Could you say the name, when you're referring to Hashem, Harachamon, he's the merciful one? Could you say those words in the bathroom? And the Gemara, in conclusion, turns around and says, yes, they are all permitted, except one word. One name you can't use in the bathroom, which is the name Shalom. Hashem is known as peace, and you can't use that word. Any other word is allowed. One of the commentators on the Gemara, called the Maharsha, explains what is there about the word Shalom. And he explains as follows. Whenever you have a situation of peace in a relationship, it's not that the two sides have created the peace. What in reality you have done is you have brought the presence of the Almighty into that scenario. The verse says, Oise Shalom bimraimov, he who makes peace in his high places, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. He will make peace over us. Meaning, says the Maharsha, that the word shalom is the presence of the Almighty in that setting. It's not that you have created it, you have created the means of peace, but the actual tranquility and the settlement of that situation is the actual presence of the divine presence there, the Shekhinah. That's the meaning of he makes peace in his. You have created a mokum for him. Now, once you understand that when you have shalom, peace, as we explained as the vessel which holds the marriage together, in Hebrew, the keli hamachzik brocha, the vessel which holds it, the implication is that you didn't just smile at each other and give up for each other or express a love for each other and enjoy each other's company. It's much more than that. The meaning of Shalom Bayis is you have created, in the words of the Talmud, a miniature Beis HaMikdash, a miniature temple. It's a small area of a sanctuary here. The concept of Shalom Bayis is creating a place where the Almighty settles and his presence is there. And it's more than just a smile. It's more than agreeing not to throw plates at each other. It's more than just a recognition of not fighting. It's much more than that. It's more than the smile. It's more than the embrace. It's more than the happiness. It's a residence of the Almighty. If that point is understood, then we have a major distinction of what it means by the elixir of a Jewish marriage to a non-Jewish marriage. In a secular marriage, if we can say such a thing, there is, it means a loving twosome. You have John and you have Mary, and they like each other. They're physically attracted. They enjoy the same amusements. They like the same movies. They enjoy each other's company. And they decide to live together and get married, perhaps. How long does the marriage last between John and Mary? So long as John and Mary love each other. And if they don't, then they'll split up. And John will go and live with Sue, and Mary will go and live with Bill. And that's the way it works. It's a loving relationship, so long as it is a loving relationship. It's just a straight line, and they two meet and hopefully love each other and stay together as long as the movies and the golf course and the vacations and the money and everything holds out. And that's the definition of marital harmony, a good time, enjoying each other, sharing pursuits, and hopefully raising a family. Now, the reference, as if we understand the meaning of shalom bayis, of marital harmony in the Torah terminology, it's not a loving twosome. It's a holy threesome. You have Avraham on one side, and you have Sarah on the other side, but you have the Almighty in the middle, because you have his presence there. And Avraham and Sarah don't meet on a straight line. They grow closer to the Almighty in a triangle, with the Almighty in the middle. And therefore the pursuit of happiness is a pursuit in regard to the Almighty, in growing closer to him. It's a holy threesome. And that's what we mean when we say ish ve'isha shchina shuya b'neim, a husband and a wife, and the divine presence is between them. The meaning of the shalom is much deeper. It has a spiritual connotation of growing in your performance and activity in Torah and mitzvahs, and growing in a specific way of holiness. That's why when a husband and a wife decide to marry, he turns around and says to her, Hare'at mekudeshes li, you are sanctified to me, when he puts the ring on the finger under the chuppah. The meaning is the sanctification. The Gemara explains at the beginning of the tractate Kiddushin, Rashi explains that, and she's forbidden to everybody else. That's the meaning of Kedusha. The holiness is that she belongs to him and nobody else can touch her, no other man. That's the meaning of the holiness, because there is a Kedusha to the lady. She grew in holiness when they married. She became a different person. She's connected to him in building a home with the Almighty's presence there in the middle. Now that's the holy threesome there. And therefore, the ahava is a little different from the concept of a loving twosome like we have with John and Mary. There is a famous essay written by the great Rosh Yeshiva of the Telz Yeshiva, Rav Mordechai Gifter, on the Megillah Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. And Rav Gifter asks a question. If you want to read the essay, it's the beginning of the Art Scroll commentary of Shir HaShirim, of the Song of Songs. It's like an essay written by the Rosh Yeshiva of regarding the holiness of the book of Shir HaShirim. Now we know that the book of Shir HaShirim, which was written by King Solomon as a young man, is called Kodesh Kodoshim, is Holy of Holies. It's a very, very holy, safe Megillah in the context that it describes the love, and it's really a conversation between the Almighty and the Jewish nation, and each express their love and their affection one to the other. The question which Rav Gifter asks is that why, if it's referring to this relationship between the Jewish nation and the Almighty, why is it given as a parable of a husband and wife? Why is that the text? Of course, it's much deeper than that. It's not just referring to the flattery of the husband to a wife, it's referring to the flattery of the Almighty, who is the chosen, who is the groom, to Bnei Yisrael, who are the kala, who is the bride, but it's written in a parable. But why that parable? Asks Rav Gifter, why is that chosen? It's coming to teach us that the relationship of a husband and wife is a relationship of holiness. It is in reality Kodesh Kodoshim. It is holy in essence. And the relationship has to be in that way, that the sanctification, the holiness of the marriage is that, like you can't go into the Holy of Holies. No one can ever enter into there, except the high priest one day. No one can ever enter into a marriage between a husband and wife, because it is intrinsically holy. That's the nature of the marriage. Now, once that point is very clear and is understood, we begin to understand why it's written in this parable of a husband and wife. What's behind this? A marriage is a holy threesome with the Almighty there in the middle. And therefore the happiness comes from building a sanctuary of Shabbos, of making a Yom Tov, of creating a mokum, a place where they will learn Torah and give charity and keep kosher and keep the home and build a sanctuary between the two of them. That's the nature of a Jewish marriage. And that's what we mean when we say the keli hamachzik brocha, the vessel that holds the blessing between the husband and wife. The holiness comes from the growing in the laws of the Torah, in growing in understanding and recognizing the Almighty. That's behind the message of the elixir of a Jewish marriage. Of course, conventionally, the rules are the same. The happiness, the joy, the caring, the ability to give up one for the other. Those, of course, are basic rules in the relationship of marriage of a husband and wife. But in Torah terminology, it goes much deeper. The elixir of marriage is bringing the Almighty into the marriage, of ensuring that there is a kedusha, a holiness, which is what the husband says at the time when he chooses her under the chuppah. That's the meaning behind this. Once this point is grasped, then the children and all that is done in the home is a little temple which they build together. And that's the meaning of the elixir of Jewish marriage. The conventional rules, but then the spiritual rules, the rules of how to live together with the third partner, growing closer to the Almighty, and like Shir Hashirim is written, and it is Holy of Holies, because of course it's not just a description of a romance between a man and a woman. In essence, the book of Shir Hashirim is Holy of Holies. That nature of the book gives us the guidelines of what marriage is all about. No one can interfere, no one can disturb, no one can interrupt. It has that nature to it like the Holy of Holies, because there is between the two of them the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which lives amongst them. Thank you.